So a while back, I showed you how to make these mitered cornered blankets with plush fabric. I told you to save your scraps because I was going to show you some fun things that you can make with these scraps. Well, this Lovey bunny blanket, they're adorable, super cozy, and quite easy to make. And they make really fun baby gifts. I'm Jan Howell, and in this sewing tutorial, I'm going to walk you through this project step by step. Make sure you watch the whole video because I'm going to show you some great tips for sewing with plush fabric. I'm going to show you how to insert a label if you want to. And I'm going to show you some other basic sewing skills and tips for sewing that you'll be able to use for other sewing projects. There is a little bit of embroidery involved, but if you haven't embroidered before, no worries. These are basic sewing embroidery stitches that are really easy to do, and I'll show you how to do that. And as always, I try to simplify the process and make these sewing projects as easy as possible. So without any further ado, let's hop right into it. Pun intended. First off, let's go over the materials and items and things that you'll need to make your Lovey blanket. You'll need the pattern downloaded and printed and cut out. I will put the link where you can get the pattern in the description below. When you're looking at my videos, if there's any information that you want to know, most likely it'll be in the description. If not, leave a comment and I'll get right back to you. What makes these Lovey blankets so cozy is this plush fabric on one side. You could always make these with just flannel on both sides or something, but this fabric really does make it cozy. Now, it's kind of pricey by the yard if you buy it at the fabric store by the yard, but you can, this particular piece that I have was just an already made up throw that I bought, and you see them all over and they're really inexpensive to buy, and there's a ton of yardage on there. If you were to have to buy this by the yard, it would be pretty pricey. And this faux fur, it's just a very lightweight, it's stretchy, it's very soft. So just keep your eye out for already made blankets or throws. The other side of the blanket you can use, this is just a piece of flannel, or you could just use a regular cotton blend fabric. And as you can see, you only need a small piece of the fabric. You can make these as big as you want or as small as you want. You'll need a pair of paper scissors to cut out your pattern pieces, and there's only 3, and a pair of fabric scissors. A rotary cutter is nice if you want to get those straight cuts. Don't forget to check out my video on some tips for rotary cutting, and some embroidery floss for the eyes and the nose. Now, depending on what color of fabric you're using will depend on what color you want. So if I'm probably going to use this color for the nose instead of the pink, because that might not show up as well. You'll need an embroidery needle, some straight pins or fabric clips. If you want to insert a tag, have that on hand and ready to sew in. And of course, you'll need your sewing machine. To turn the items inside out, you'll need some kind of device to turn it inside out. You can use even a pencil, the eraser end of a pencil. This is a bamboo turning stick. And you'll also need just a little bit of fiberfill stuffing and some masking tape or some painter's tape. I have cut out my front and back pieces. They are 13 by 13 inches or 33 centimeters. Like I mentioned before, you can make this as big as you want. For the bunny head, I'm going to make the head out of this and one side of the ear this white. So some tips on when you're cutting out your pieces. The pattern will indicate the stretch of the fabric, which direction that is, and the grain of the fabric, which is not stretchy. So as you can see on this, I'll demonstrate how when I pull it this way, there is no stretch to that. But when I pull it this way, there is some stretch. Can you see that? In order for the shape of the head to be correct, you need to place those on the correct grain or stretch of the fabric. So one other thing that you'll want to know, and a tip, is that this fabric also has what's called a nap to it. If I were to smooth my hand down this way, you can see that how it lies just nice and flat. But if I were to rub my hand that way, you can see how it looks different. If I were to have one head piece cut out like this and the other like this, it would look funny on the face. One side would be, the fabric would be going one direction and the other going the other. So it's important that you place the pattern pieces correctly. Now we'll just go over that. The easiest way to do that, if you have plenty of fabric, is just to fold the fabric over. That means the nap is all going this way, and I'm going to get a front, a left, and a right side with the same facing but flipped. So I hope that makes sense. If I were to cut out two pieces, say we need to cut two facing the same way, then you're not going to have a left and a right. So you could, if you're cutting it out single layered, cut one out and then flip it over. But what I find the easiest thing to do is just to flip it over, place it on there, pin it in place. We're on the straight. This is the stretch, and cut two out this way. The ear piece, you'll need to cut out 4, but since I'm only using the pink for the back side of the ear, I only need to cut out 2. So I'll place that here. Another thing to mention, these little notches on the head, we want to cut them outward. You don't ever want to cut down in, and the seam allowance has already been accounted for, so there's no need to make the pieces bigger. My headpiece is facing this way. I want to make sure that this is facing the same and not like this because of the nap. The first thing you'll need to do is decide which side of the fabric that you want to be exposed on the outside. See how this is a little bit more fluffy and furry looking, where this is a little bit more condensed. So it depends. Do you want that look or do you want that look? I think I'm going to go for the fluffy look. And so I'm going to put those right sides together. Line up my edges, and the first thing that we're going to do is just sew the front face seam, the center seam, down the center of the face. So just this side. I have set my sewing machine to a single stitch. The length is about 3, and I'm going to back stitch at the beginning at the end of my seam. Seam allowance is just 3/8 of an inch, which is usually just the edge of your presser foot. You could go a little smaller if you want, but I like to give that extra width just to make sure I'm catching both layers. Just take your time around those curves. And then I'll do the same for the back of the head. I'm going to flip the right sides together, and we're sewing down that unnotched side, which is the back of the head. So I have cut out 2 of the white, which is going to be the front of the ear and the back of the ear. So I want to make sure that I'm using the right side, which is that more plushy side. I'm going to put it right side together with that front ear. I'm going to pin those in place and then sew all the way around and leave the bottom part open so that we can turn it inside out. Going around the corner, if you need to lift up your presser foot and move it just a titch, you can do that. Just go nice and slow. Before I go any further, I'm going to check both sides to make sure that I've caught both layers, and then I'm going to take the scissors and trim off a little bit of the excess of that seam allowance. And around these curves, I'm going to just take little snips being very careful not to cut into the seam. And little notches out on that outward curve. I'm going to flip the right sides out and see how the nap is flowing the same way. And for the ears, take your turning stick or your pencil, the eraser end of a pencil, and oh, look how cute those ears are. So now to get the ears ready to sew in, take this is the front, fold it in half, the bottom edge. I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew the bottom edge really close to the edge of the fabric, not a full seam allowance. And this one, you'll want to fold this side over so you have a left and a right ear. So I have folded the ear over and basted the ends so they look like this. I'm going to baste them in place on the head front. You can tell the front because it has this pointed nose out there. And we're going to, with the fold of the ear on the seam, the center seam, just a little bit past the center seam of the face, I'm going to line up the edges there, maybe even extend it out just a bit, and then I'm going to baste that in place, and then I'll do the same thing with the other ear. And I'm placing the white side down because when it flips up, it will be facing the right way. And I'm sewing really close to the edge, not the full seam allowance. Take the other ear. Let's just flip those up and see if they're correct. And that looks good. So now we're going to apply the back of the head. We'll flip the ears back down, open up the back of the head. This is the top of the head, the center seam. I know that looks a little overwhelming right now to how to sew this all together, but no worries. So I'm just going to put a pin right there on that center seam, and that's all I'm going to pin right now. We're going to sew this side first, and to do that, I'm going to just tuck the ears in, line up my bottom dart there, and sew up to that center point, and then I'll adjust my ears over and then continue to sew around. Let me show you how it's done. Now right here, just go slow because you're sewing through a lot of layers and you don't want to break a needle. Just adjust and make sure you take out your pin. Leave my needle down, lift up my presser foot, and just pull those little ears over to the side and flatten them out so that your edges of your fabric are coming together. So before I trim anything off, I'm going to look on both sides and make sure I've caught all layers of fabric, which it looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and trim a little bit off those seam allowances. And then to turn it right side facing out, you can just gently pull those ears. Poke out the nose. Looking good. Grab your stuffing and just start stuffing it into the head. You want to stuff it quite firmly. So I like to put a little bit in and then take my stick or my pencil in there. Just poke it out into the nose and the back of the head. We're going to be gathering up around the neck, so you don't have to stuff down into the neck. I think that's probably pretty good. To gather up around the neck, take your needle, double thread it, and knot the end. Insert the needle from the inside up just to the curve of the neck there. And this fabric is the weave is kind of loose, so you might have to tie a couple knots or make the knot really big. And all you do is take a running stitch around the base of the neck and the head there where it meets, and so it gathers it up. Just up and down big stitches. And you get back to where you started. Just give it a pull, and I go around a couple times just to cinch that up really well. Looks like that. I'm gonna take a little stitch, leave a loop, wrap my needle around a couple times in the loop, and then pull it, and that will knot it. I can just stick it in right where I came out, and then pull it out somewhere, and then clip your thread. So now we have our head. Now we're going to apply the nose and the eyes. So to do that, I'm going to use this brown color, this tan color, I guess, for the nose. And what we'll be doing is just doing a satin stitch, just upside down triangle, starting at the tip where the point is. So the widest part of the nose will be about right there and about that wide. You can just eyeball it. I'm going to use all 6 strands of the embroidery floss. Knot your end. Poke your needle in through the bottom and put your thumb where you want it to come out. And just see if you can just get it up to that point. Decide how wide you want the nose to be. Just going to take a straight stitch across that front center seam, come out right next to that first stitch, just below it a little bit, so it makes that straight line, and then I'll just go back and forth, making a little triangle there. Don't want to pull it too tight. And then I'm going to gradually make those stitches not as wide so it comes to a point. And to knot that off, I'm just going to take a little tiny stitch, leave a loop, and wrap it around twice. Gently give it a little tug. So there's a knot right there, but we're going to hide that knot by sticking the needle right back down in and pulling it out the back of the head. Give it a tug, clip your thread, then that knot and thread are hidden inside. There you have the nose. That looks pretty cute. Let's do the eyes. And so for babies and just for security reasons, I'm not going to put a bead or anything. I'm just going to take a darker thread. I'm going to use this dark brown. You could use black, and stitch the eye right there with the embroidery floss. So I'm going to change the thread to this dark. Make a big knot, end of your embroidery floss. Decide where you want the eye to be with your thumb. Stick your needle in and pull it out. And don't pull real hard, just pull it up till it gets to the, or you might pull it through the fabric. And then I'm going to take a little stitch just to secure that knot in place. Couple stitches. And I just take back and forth stitches like little stars to make that more definite. Then I'm going to bring it over to the other side for the other eye. Little stitches. I'm going to take my little stitch, and knot it. Poke it down in and out. Now let's get the blanket ready. Take your blanket top, decide which side you want. We're going to use that same plush side as the right side. I'm going to fold that in half once, and then I'm going to fold it again. So it's folded in quarters. We're trying to find that center point. I'm going to take my scissors and barely clip that corner. Just barely clip that, like so. So you can see how by barely clipping it, it's going to create a pretty big hole. So better to start little teeny than too big. That's about right. Now to keep that secure in place and to gather that a little bit, I'm gonna bring the right side facing up. I have double threaded my needle again with pink thread, knot at the end. Start and bring the needle up from the back. What we're going to do is just take some securing stitches around that hole. Again, just big running stitches. All right, we've got that in place. I'm going to leave my thread just hanging for a minute. Take the head, just make a little wad there, and then insert that bottom wad from the neck to the inside and pull it through. And that's what it will look like. And I'm going to have my head, the nose, point to a corner. So adjust the nose to a corner, and we're just going to use little slip stitches to secure that in place. So I'm starting from the bottom of the blanket. I'm going to take a little stitch just above that stitching line that we gathered in earlier, and then take another stitch into the blanket right next to it, and then another stitch into the head. So you're going from head to blanket, all the way around, and we're going to do that twice around. When you get back to where you started, take a little stitch. We're going to knot it off, leaving that loop, wrapping it around a couple times, gently pulling it, sticking it in and out, and clipping your thread. This is exciting. Now we're ready to sew the front to the back. If you want to apply a tag, this is the time to do it. So we want to include that in the seam. The fold of the tag is on the inside, and we want to account for the seam allowance, which is 3/8 of an inch. And if you want more details about how to apply these tags to all of your projects, make sure you check out that video on my channel. But I'm going to just base that in place. I'll take it to the sewing machine and sew like 1/8 of an inch along that tag to keep it in place. Before I sew this together, I need to locate which side of the fabric has the stretch, because this fabric has a definite stretch to it. So this is the stretch side. If I were to sew the stretch side to the not stretchy side of this, the fabric would shift, and it would be just, after you wash it and things, it could get kind of a little bit skiwampus. So although this is a woven fabric, it's just a flannel, it will have a stretchy side to it. So you can see that that has some stretch to it, and this doesn't. This is my stretchy side, and this isn't. So I'm going to place right sides together, stretch, stretch. Line up my edges, either pin or clip it in place. And we're going to leave like a 3.5 to 4 inch section open to turn it right side facing out. I like to use 2 red clips or 2 red pins so that I can remember not to sew in this area. We're going to make sure that our ears are out of the way. Going to start here, back stitch, sew around the square and stop here and back stitch. Now to sew around the edge, I'm going to use a lightning bolt stitch or just a little tiny zigzag stitch, not very wide, so that if this blanket gets pulled, the seams are not going to pop. If you have a lightning bolt stitch on your machine, most do, you can use that. If not, I'm going to turn my width of the zigzag to about maybe a 1.5, and the length to 3. So I've sewn all the way around. I have left this section open. Just going to take my scissors and trim off those corners, making sure not to cut into the seams. Turn it right side facing out. Take your turning stick and poke out the corners. Now we need to sew this opening closed. So all you're going to do is fold the seam allowance inside, clip that in place, take your needle and thread. Now, if you're not particular and don't mind a little stitching there, you could top stitch this with the sewing machine, but I like to do it by hand. You get a better finish, and then we are going to top stitch around the edge. So double thread your needle again. Of course, not your ends. Find the edge of that opening, stick your needle in. So this is a stitch that we use on a lot of projects. It's the ladder stitch. It's really easy to do. So my edges are folded under. We're just going to be sewing back and forth. I'm going to come into, I'm starting from the fold of the flannel, and I'm going to take a stitch that way in the fold of the plush fabric, and then take another stitch across into the flannel, and then in straight across into the plush fabric. So pretty simple. We'll just continue this stitch all the way down to close off that opening. So I've sewn the opening closed, and now we're going to top stitch 1/2 of an inch using a zigzag stitch all the way around. So to make sure that this is lying flat, I'm going to take my head and just place it center, smooth out the edges, and pin this in place. If you don't pin it in place, when you're sewing around, it can have a tendency to shift, and we don't want that. I'm going to pin around the perimeter. So as I sew, that will stay in place. This minky fabric can be a little tricky to work with as far as that goes. So the trick is lots of pins. All right, we'll just start at one corner and sew all the way around with that zigzag stitch. I'm going to put my width at a 3 and my length at a 3. Now we're going to top stitch on quarters so that the front and the back doesn't come apart when you wash it, and it will just keep this fabric from shifting, which this minky fabric does. So I have placed several pins on the blanket just to hold it in place so it doesn't shift while I'm sewing. And to mark those quarter points, I'm going to use my trusty painter's tape, or you can use masking tape. Fold the blanket in half and find the halfway points and mark it with a pin. Just at the tip of the fold there, just poke your needle in and then fold it the other direction. And find those halfway points. We're going to open that back up. Take a strip of tape. Find that pin that you inserted, and I'm just going to eyeball it so it's parallel and square, and the edge of the tape aligned with that halfway point. Just gently put it on, and then we're going to do that for all 4 sides, and we're going to stitch down the edge of that tape as close to the head as we can. Okay, let's go ahead and sew it. I'm going to keep it on that zigzag stitch. I leave my pin in so I know which side of the tape to sew on. I'm going to not sew all the way to the edge, but start at that top stitching there. Clip any of the threads that you left. So there you have it. Fun little sewing project. The little ones are going to love it. Be sure to check out the link in the description below for the pattern where you can get that, download and print it. And if you have any questions, make sure you leave a comment. I can get back to you. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click on the bell in your notifications so that you can be notified when I put new things up. Have a wonderful day, have fun sewing, and whatever you do, choose to make it simple. We'll see you next time.